Hello, everyone, and welcome to the fifth in our series of statewide synchronous lectures for Introduction to Sociology, SOCI 111. My name is Matthew Howell. I am the full-time sociology instructor at the Valparaiso campus. You can reach me at either the campus phone number, which is 219-464-8514, extension 3084 is my extension, or you can email me at mhowell1@ivytech.edu. That's mhowell1@ivytech.edu. If you should have any questions. Okay, today we are going to be covering Chapter 7, Mass Media, and discussing the concepts in this particular chapter. Our session will be briefer today as this is a shorter chapter. Some of the things we're going to be examining: sociological perspectives on the media, who are the audience, we'll examine the media's global reach, and we'll talk social policy in the mass media, the right to privacy, which has become an issue recently. Some of the questions we're going to be trying to address: why are the media so influential? Who benefits from media influence and why? And the different theoretical perspectives may have different answers there. And how do we maintain cultural and ethical standards in the face of negative media images? So, when we talk about media, in general, when you hear people referencing media, what they're referring to is what is actually the distinction of mass media. Media is anything designed to convey information. So keeping a personal diary, Facebook page, Twitter, instant messaging, texting, all of these things are media. Mass media are those forms of print and electronic communication that are meant to be reached by the masses, that are designed to reach large numbers of people and carry messages to a widespread audience. New forms of mass media have changed people's viewing and listening habits. If you're into news, it is no longer necessary to sit down between 5 and 6 o'clock to catch the news on TV or to pick up a newspaper. These things have become a little bit outmoded. Many people now read electronic papers and magazines. They just read them on their computer. This has changed the way that these mass media outlets are doing business. You no longer have access to 24-hour news stations on cable. YouTube often posts, or people post segments of TV shows on YouTube. So there's all kinds of new ways to consume media. The idea of cultural convergence is the flow of content across multiple media and the migration of media audiences. If you've ever been watching a TV show and they mention something, you pick up your smartphone to look it up, and it gives you the information, say, on Wikipedia on your smartphone about what you're talking about, but then you see that there's actually a Facebook page for the group that you just heard mentioned. So you get online to your computer and you go to the Facebook page. This is the flow of content across multiple media and the migration of the media audiences as well. Additionally, we have things like e-readers, Kindle, Nook, which means that you can carry hundreds of books with you on a tablet as opposed to having to physically carry books. So, one of the first innovations, kind of if you think about media with the idea of cultural convergence and media migration, the flow of content, would have been audiobooks, a new format for consuming literature. So when we think about this, there's a lot of ways that technology changes our consumption patterns in media. Okay, moving on to our theoretical perspectives. By now you should understand that the functionalist view is going to focus on functions provided to society and how that helps maintain social stability. So what are the functions that media provides, or the mass media provides, to society? First of all, of course, it's a source of entertainment. It socializes us into appropriate values, beliefs, and behaviors for our particular culture, enforces social norms. Whether you're watching news, whether you're watching a sitcom, whether you're watching drama, documentary, a lot of what you're seeing is something that's reinforcing or enforcing social norms of behavior. When we watch a crime drama show and the bad guys get caught at the end and put in jail for a long time, that's reinforcing the idea that cops catch people who violate social norms, especially when they're the larger norms that we refer to as mores or laws. Conferral of status. Think about, People's 50 Sexiest People or Time Magazine's Person of the Year. This is conferring status on these individuals. Or alternatively, we can even think about what happens with people who start out on reality TV. Somebody like Elizabeth Hasselbeck, who is now a regular on Fox News. A lot of that comes out of the initial status she gained by being on reality TV. I'm pretty sure she started out on Survivor. Promote consumption. Ours is a consumer culture. And not just advertising. I mean, advertising, of course, is the blatant way that consumption is promoted. But if we think about product placement, if you're familiar with the movie Demolition Man, what was the only restaurant to survive the fast food wars? Taco Bell. But what it's saying, it's doing there with product placement is it's kind of like a mini advertisement. Taco Bell must be good if they're the only one that survived the fast food wars, so we should go get Taco Bell because that will satisfy our appetite. And finally, media can create dysfunction through what's called narcotizing desensitization or narcotizing dysfunction. And this is when particular images or stories are repeated constantly to the point where it loses its shock and awe value. And instead of promoting people to act, it actually restricts people from acting because they've become desensitized to it. A way of thinking about that, if you were aware of what was going on in the world in 2001, anybody can tell you where they were and what they were doing, and I can do it right now, where they were and what they were doing when the towers came down. I woke up early that morning. It was a Tuesday morning because I had to be to work at 7. This is when I was still working in the restaurant industry, so I didn't even look at the news. And I didn't hear about it until people started coming in and telling me what was going on. I got home from work that day. I got off work at 2 o'clock. I got home from work that day, and then I saw the planes hit the towers and the towers come down. I even remember the day of the week. However, I would have much, much more trouble remembering where I was and what I was doing the 100th time I saw it or the 1,000th time I saw it. And it seemed to play over and over again. Now, this event was too shocking for the population to become desensitized to it. But think about reports of war from 2003 through 2005, the war in Iraq or the war in Afghanistan, Initially, we would hear about casualties, but we become desensitized to these things as they continuously get reported. Okay, now, the way that socialization occurs is through what are referred to as agents of socialization. If you remember our discussion from a previous chapter, it would have been, I want to say chapter 4, 2 weeks ago, our discussion on socialization. There were 4 big agents of socialization: family, peer group, education, and the media. So the media functions as an agent of socialization. And it increases social cohesion, or what Durkheim would call solidarity, by presenting a common view of the culture. We may have regional variation across the United States of America in cultural variation. However, when a movie comes out, when a song becomes really popular, when TV shows get really popular, this actually increases social cohesion because it's something to which everybody relates then. Provides this collective experience for everybody in society. Everybody was discussing what happened on Seinfeld last night around the water cooler, or everybody was talking about what's going on CSI or NCIS, or even reality TV shows. And again, even though we may deplore the behavior we see on reality TV shows, and a lot of people may hold the view that these are people who would do anything for their 15 minutes of fame, it still kind of presents a common view of our culture. There's a lot of concern about the impact of violent programming on viewer behavior. Additionally, there is concern about very young children being plunked down in front of the TV for hours at a time, as it's used as kind of a distraction and a babysitter. And there are people doing research on those two things right now. As I said, enforcer of social norms, right? It reaffirms proper behavior. In fact, if you think about shows like Modern Family, which has a same-sex orientation couple on it, they're actually trying to promote the idea that this should be accepted as a norm as well. Critical role in human sexuality, beyond the idea of making same-sex relationships more socially acceptable and kind of like affirming that as a norm. The media tells us what is desirable in a spouse. It gives us ideas about how to express ourselves in a sexual fashion, promotes sexual behaviors. When we talk about innovative uses of new media and having positive consequences, one of the first positive uses of media as something that was kind of creating a norm of educational attainment as the expectation was Sesame Street on PBS. Talked about conferral of status, singling out persons or issues, making it significant. We talked about, with the magazine covers, People's 50th Sexiest People, Time Magazine's Person of the Year, or, thinking about other things. There were a lot of other terrorist attacks during the week when Charlie Hebdo in France was the site of a mass shooter incident. There were 12 people killed there, I believe, and I think it was under 27 injured. There were some fairly significant terrorist attacks with much higher loss of life in Israel for example, is one place. But because the mass media focused so much on what happened at Charlie Hebdo, that became a significant event in everybody's mind, and something that, there's been a cover story on Time magazine about recently. Promoting consumption. It is unfortunate, and I was looking into this. You can actually find the information I'm talking about. They do discuss it in a documentary called The Corporation. There are advertising firms that specialize in marketing to children and in getting children to nag parents, what they call the nag factor, to nag parents for the goods they're promoting. Average child views 20,000 ads a year. Commercials, product placements, brand loyalty. It supports economy, informs and underwrites media. So, but there are, and I'll probably talk a little bit more about what I was discussing when we get to the conflict view, because it's looking a little bit more at that type of advertising, the nag factor, as exploiting children. But just so you know, media focuses on children. Brand loyalty is the idea that if you can lodge your brand in an individual's head to the point where it almost becomes part of their identity, they become very, very loyal and will become a lifelong customer. Okay. Narcotizing dysfunction. Provides such massive amounts of information that audience becomes numb and fails to act on the information. As I said, the reason they call it narcotizing dysfunction is because it creates a soporific effect where the immediacy of the story and the scope and scale of the story become almost discarded because the audience is so numb, kind of fails to act on the information. Okay, now, the first thing that we have to talk about when we talk about conflict theory in the media is this idea of hegemonic or hegemonic, depending on how you want to pronounce it. It comes from the Greek word hegemony, which means king or leader. But the idea of hegemonic media production. The media is a tool of the elites used to promote their kind of worldview. So, media reflect and exacerbate the divisions of society and the world. First way this happens, there are about 6 corporations controlling over 95% of the media production in the United States of America. 6 corporations. How many people do we think are involved at each of those corporations, decision making about what projects get made? This is what conflict view refers to as gatekeeping, the fact that there's a small number of people that decide what material gets offered to the rest of society for consumption. Now, we said 6 companies. Let's be generous and say that, or realistic, however you want to view it, there's 1,000 people at each of those corporations that can make a decision to produce a book, produce a movie, produce music that gets released for sale then. So 300 million people, 6,000 deciding what those 300 million get to consume as media. The internet has opened this a little bit and made it a little bit easier for people to get their stuff out there. If you think about like YouTube, people can get, 1 million, 2 million hits on the video of their cat playing the piano they post on YouTube. That doesn't mean that all of a sudden a video of that gets released for sale. the people that we think of like YouTube sensations such as maybe Justin Bieber, Facebook or YouTube, how he was kind of making videos of himself singing and promoting himself. But he still had to go through the gatekeeping before he got huge because he still had to sign a record contract. The internet does free it up. However, gatekeeping still controls flow of information on the internet, especially with this new issue right now, what's referred to as net neutrality. What some internet providers want to do is have two levels of kind of broadband access, one that's very fast that you pay a premium for, and one that's slower. And the premium is going to be, here's this idea of creating two tiers on the internet, because the majority of people won't be able to pay those premiums. The people that will be able to pay those premiums are the representatives of companies, corporations, and things like that. So conflict would view that particular debate as the elites trying to maintain their control over, or trying to extend their control of media over the internet as well. Media monitoring used to be that watchdog groups would keep an eye on it, but it's become well known right now that a lot of social media and consumer websites gather data about your purchasing patterns in order to offer you things that your purchasing patterns indicate you might be interested in. If you think about Amazon, Amazon has recommendations for you. You go there, you log in, it'll pull up recommendations for you based upon your shopping history with Amazon. However, something like that might not be objectionable, but when Facebook starts using the news feed in a way to gather data about people's preferences without their knowledge, people have an issue with that. It begins privacy issues. Facebook has tried to, or rather, Facebook has gathered metadata about Facebook subscribers and provided it to companies. Companies are willing to purchase information about media usage among individuals because it helps them market to those individuals. And then finally, of course, the federal government gathering metadata, cell phone, internet usage, not necessarily emails, not necessarily, they say they're not looking at the content. They say they're just looking for network nodes and connections in there. But this is a problem, media monitoring. This idea of the dominant ideology and constructing reality. Dominant ideology from a conflict perspective, cultural beliefs and practices that maintain the interests, social, economic, and political interests of the elites in a particular society. So if we think about something like we hear about on the media all the time, everybody being able to participate in the American dream. Well, what is the American dream? The American dream is kind of this idea that hard work and education will get everybody to a middle-class lifestyle where they will have a comfortable living, be able to afford their own home, cars, and then be able to save money and put money away for a retirement. We think about it, then the American dream also kind of incorporates this idea that anybody, if they are willing to work hard enough, can become rich. So this protects the interests of the elites in a certain sense, because what it does is it's saying that it keeps people opposed to tax reform, because everybody thinks, well, if I'm the next person that's going to be rich, I don't want to lose all my money to taxes either. Stereotypes, another part of the dominant ideology. Unreliable generalization about all members of a group that does not recognize individual differences within the group. From the conflict perspective, something that leaps to mind as far as this goes, using stereotypes, would be the defense of police shooting unarmed black males by focusing on building a narrative in which black males are guilty of criminal behavior at greater rates, and this justifies what the police are doing. Kind of ignores a whole host of social and economic factors that may contribute into that, and basically just says that black males are a criminal type, and that's why police shoot them. It's using a stereotype, a broad generalization about all members of African American males, and not recognizing individual differences within the group. And as part of that dominant ideology, or can be, you see how stereotypes can be used by the dominant ideology. Okay, another thing, we talk about dominant ideology protecting interests. That's within the nation. When we talk about dominant ideology on a global scale, what we're talking about then is the wholesale export and imitation of U.S. media. There are, I want to say, over 100 idol programs in various countries throughout the world. There's British Idol, Irish Idol, Australian Idol, Indian Idol. There's a number of them in countries all around the world. The ones that tend to get popular on a global scale come out of American Idol. 80% of the movies shown in theaters around the world as first-run movies are produced right here in the United States of America. U.S. media relies on overseas markets, well, for program ideas and distribution. Anybody a fan of Grace Point? Did you know that it was originally an English crime drama called Broadchurch? Well, it was. So Big Brother, originally British. So a lot of stuff that was produced overseas gets remade. I can name other things too. The movie The Birdcage, which originally a French movie, La Cage aux Folles. The movie True Lies was originally a French action-adventure movie. So, and then distributing our cultural products, which does generate some of the resentment against U.S. culture throughout the world, because they feel like their own particular cultural heritage is being sacrificed on the altar of U.S. culture and consumerism. Television is kind of broadening out. It says it's moving away from U.S. domination. That may be true. But when we think about movies, we're still very much 80% there. And there are still a lot of U.S. shows shown around the world. This is that idea here. If they're losing their cultural identity, they may try to defend against what's referred to as cultural diffusion, cultural isomorphism, the idea that in a global economy, as politics, economy, and culture become increasingly intertwined, smaller nations lose their identity to the larger, more powerful nations. Okay, the digital divide. There's two ways of thinking about the digital divide. The first one exists on a generational basis, and that's when older people have trouble adapting to new forms of technology, media technology, like, say, a computer, cell phone, smartphone, Twitter, texting, all this kind of stuff. And there may be a generational gap there for a digital divide. The digital divide in the conflict perspective is the economic divide that prohibits low-income individuals from participating in media production. Low-income groups, racial and ethnic minorities, rural residents, and citizens of developing countries have less access to the latest technology. That, may be true. It may be difficult to get internet in a small community because there's no provider that's been there. You may have to rely on something that comes across like a phone line modem instead of getting wireless broadband. And this can hamper development, economic development in regions, in the countryside, and in underdeveloped and undeveloped nations because the internet and new media are becoming essential to economic progress and economic development. If you don't have access to them, it makes it even harder for you to develop that. Okay, feminism really kind of is, as we've discussed before, comes out of the ideas in the conflict theory. It focuses specifically on gender, but it's looking at social inequality. And that mass media stereotype and misrepresent the social reality when we're talking about media. Conflict theorists and feminists share that in common. There's a lot of stereotypes out there that keep women in a subordinate status. They're underrepresented as protagonists, overrepresented as victims probably. If you actually sat down and looked at crime dramas and dramas in general, women might be overrepresented as victims, as people needing protection, but they're underrepresented in general and underrepresented as strong protagonists capable of taking care of themselves. Perpetuate stereotypical views of gender. This actually, we're getting away from that in media, like television shows and movies. We are not getting away from that in advertising. One of the ads that I use as an illustration of this particular point is a Tide laundry detergent ad in which there's a father who's dipping his son's feet into plaster of Paris in order to make socks, with the assumption being that he's too much of an idiot to do laundry. Now, this makes the man look like the fool, but this actually reinforces a stereotypical view of males being unable to do household chores, and if females want the household chores done correctly, they have to do them themselves. So even though it's making men look foolish, it's actually benefiting men. So we see this emphasis on traditional sex roles and then the normalization of violence against women. We're getting away from that now, but if you think back to 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, in movies, in TV, and I'm going to use, even though he's one of my favorite actors, I'm going to use him because this happened in a lot of the roles he played, where he would quite literally smack a woman, force himself on her, and then she would melt into his arms, and that's Humphrey Bogart. The idea that all you have to do is slap a woman and all of a sudden she is desirous of you is a stereotype, and that's traditional sex roles, and it's normalizing violence against women. There's still some of this going on. But we are seeing more strong roles for females in media. If we think about a crime drama like Castle, more often than not, the female detective has to save the male writer in that particular show. And in that show, the male writer is guilty of more illogical behavior, more what we refer to as hysterical behavior. And the female detective is actually the strong, logical protagonist in that show. So there is some cautious optimism about media portrayals with newer media products. So, finally we get to the interactionist perspective. And it's about shared understandings, ethnomethodology, how do people make sense of their world and communicate those shared understandings. This is that micro-level orientation. micro-sociology. So we're examining media on a micro level to see how they shape day-to-day social behavior. When we see stereotypes, these will perpetuate stereotypical views in individuals. Individuals will draw meaning out of those stereotypes, thinking that that's the norm, that's what's normal for society. We can also think about the line between media and mass media becoming somewhat blurred, as people who formerly might have not been able to communicate to larger groups of people. If you have, say, 100, 200 followers on Twitter, you are actually communicating to a larger number of people, making it sort of mass media in a certain sense, not at the level of millions of viewers or anything like that. But, you know, think about having Facebook friends too. When we talk about social interaction, is a Facebook friend the same as a friend from, in the historical context of it? Think about it. How many of you have friends on Facebook you've never actually met face to face? So the internet's facilitating new forms of communication and social interaction and beginning to blur the line between media and mass media. Facebook in general is probably viewed as media, but if you have 500 friends and you're able to communicate with all of them via one post, you're on the, you're verging on mass media there. So when we think about the audience, mass media as a social institution needs an audience. TV shows don't have an audience. If music doesn't have an audience, no company wants to produce something that's not going to be viewed or listened to by anybody. So an audience is necessary in mass media. Now, it can be an identifiable finite group in the case of some smaller media audiences, or a much larger undefined group, the population of the United States of America. Now, audience behavior, opinion leaders become important because they help shape the opinions around them. And in the case of media, members of an audience do not all interpret media in the same way. And somebody who can influence opinions and decisions of others about media becomes important. So an opinion leader is someone, day-to-day personal context and communication, influences opinions and decisions of others. And can shape attitudes about opinion as well, or attitudes about media as well. Hunt, doing research in 1997, found that, while feminists would like to believe that gender is one of the organizing principles of society, when it comes to reacting to media, gender is not as strong a predictor of different reactions as race is. Neither is class. Race is a stronger predictor than class when it comes to predicting different reactions to media. So, now this idea of a global village that was predicted by McLuhan, I want to say in the 60s, predicted this idea of a global village, that we would all become kind of members of the same culture, and that, that cultural differences would remain, but everybody would be participating in the same consumption of media and stuff like that. So the idea of a global village is that as media communicates information to various societies, we see this cultural isomorphism going on, where societies are becoming more and more like each other, and all participating in the global village with regards to consumption. Gitlin talks more about a global torrent, which is this idea that there is so much information being release right now that not everybody shares it, and not everybody shares it at the same level. And it's actually impossible to consume everything that's being produced. But the fact that the internet increasingly reached directly into workplaces, schools, and homes. And I think Gitlin was on the right idea there. How many people have internet at home? How many people have internet as part of their job? Well, I do, obviously, because I'm sitting here conducting a virtual lecture for an online class, which means that all of you have had the internet reach into your educational experience as well because you're taking an online class. Reference material, data banks, something like JSTOR. You could get JSTOR anywhere around the globe, so they're accessible across national boundaries. People from Europe and people from Africa and people from Asia doing social research can access the General Social Survey at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. There's a similar kind of social survey in Europe that I have accessed myself while a student at Notre Dame to gather data. So, privacy becoming something very, very controversial right now. And there's a number of different ways we can think about privacy. Beginning right here, 1.2 zettabytes of digital information to the world's already huge data library. I want to say that 1 zettabyte is 1 million gigabytes. And so that's how much we're talking about. Technology has made it easier to retrieve and store information about private individuals. So one way when we can think about this leads to violation of privacy by criminals and companies. Has anybody applied for a job and been asked for username and password for their Facebook or other social media pages? Not quite sure where companies believe that that information is relevant in the hiring process, but this is becoming increasingly common, and this is a privacy issue that certain advocacy groups are beginning to mobilize against. So, when it talks about culture lag, if you remember our discussion on culture lag is the idea that our non-material culture is struggling to catch up with new material conditions created by technology. So the complex issues of privacy and censorship can be considered illustrations of culture lag because we are using technology and we're still trying to figure out how to regulate it. If we talk about the internet and computers, everybody uses them. We're still trying to figure out how to protect privacy, how to avoid censorship, but still protect intellectual property and things like that. Functionalists have a generally favorable view of the internet. It increases social cohesion. It increases connectivity between individuals. Conflict theorists, not as favorable as says powerful groups will use technology to invade the privacy of the less powerful. The government gathering metadata on communication patterns of U.S. citizens. Technically, that is an invasion of privacy under the 4th and 5th, and I believe even the 6th Amendment. But I know specifically the 4th. Guarantee against unreasonable search and seizure. Electronic Communications Privacy Act. So when we think about policy, this act allowed federal agencies a little bit more freedom to gather data. I mean, the Supreme Court has reviewed the metadata gathering that began under the Bush administration and has continued under the Obama administration, and they have ruled it is constitutional. It is not an invasion, a violation of our 4th Amendment rights. However, we have yet to see some of these challenges play out in court. online monitoring, as far as like whether companies are going to have the right to access your Facebook page. These things have not really been tested in court yet. Online tracking and surveillance may pose a greater threat to society than online privacy. I would say probably will pose a greater threat than online piracy. When we talk about threat to society, threat to profit, threat to economy, maybe not, but greater threat to society and something that may provoke reaction in a faster fashion, tracking and surveillance, more so than piracy. Okay, so that concludes our discussion for today. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. Once again, mhowell1@ivytech.edu. And then we will continue these sessions next week on Monday at 2:30 Eastern Standard Time, 1:30 Central Standard Time. Everybody have a good week.